Welcome to Truth and Lies Radio, a program dedicated to revealing the truth and exposing the lies about the destruction of your freedom and prosperity and what you can do about it. And now, your host, former Washington right-wing activist, international living, banking and asset protection author and expert, and American patriot in exile, David Finzer.
This is David Finzer broadcasting for the next 2 hours from the Gibraltar of the Balkans here in the historic city of Novi Sad, along the banks of the beautiful Danube River in Serbia, on my 5,252nd day of voluntary exile across 6 countries in protest from an ever less free America. To join our conversation, you can call toll-free from the U.S. and Canada at 1-855-888-2292 or by Skype at Truth and Lies Radio, or for the terminally timid, you can email me at david@truthandliesradio.com. Also, please remember to check out our Facebook, Justin TV, and YouTube pages at Truth and Lies Radio Show. Well, the big news, of course, is the convention. But before that, I guess we should go to the big clock on the truthandlies.com, truthandliesradio.com's FATCA/Taxmageddon Day countdown page, which will tell you that in 122 days, 12 hours, 51 minutes, and 4 seconds, your taxes will skyrocket and your worldwide financial privacy will expire. It's nice to have something to look forward to. Less money, less privacy in a brave new world. Well, before I talk about Mr. Romney and his performance last night, which was, at least should have gotten him nominated for an Oscar, I would say, I'd like to deal with something that is of concern to a lot of people, at least ought to be concerned. After having had his delegates stolen by junkyard dog attorneys from the Romney campaign and the rules of the Republican Party diddled by the National Committee, Ron Paul's family, flying out in a private plane, was detained by the transportation safety Nazis again. Again. Yes, that's again. For the second time this year, the Paul family has been harassed by the transportation Nazis. Representative Ron Paul, his wife, and granddaughter were stopped by no less than eight TSA workers. They must have surrounded him. He obviously is a dangerous threat to the America that it has become, the Frankenstein monster that America has become. But this is hilarious. At a small airport in Clearwater, Florida, the private airport, and was told they must be screened. According to the agents, the screening was necessary because, quote, you ready for this one? Mitt Romney might be nearby. That's right, Mitt Romney might be nearby. This is part of this thing I told you about months ago, where they get to unilaterally declare events of national importance and impose a civil rights excluded, constitutional rights excluded zone. And Ron Paul and his wife and granddaughter were a threat to Mitt Romney. Well, the threat was in the primaries, and it certainly wasn't that Ron Paul was going to strap C4 around himself and fly the plane into the Tampa Bay Forum Arena and wipe out Romney. This is just pure harassment. Observers say the implication was that the Paul family posed a threat to Romney. Well, not anymore. He won that one. Good. The agents inspected the congressman's credentials and demanded to check the airplane for explosives. Now, come on. This is a 77-year-old man who, to my knowledge, has never broken a law in his life, who's put principle over everything, who rather than cause a legal battle in the Republican Party, acted as a gentleman, a word that the Republican National Committee all put together could not spell, and certainly very few of them could act like one. This is just incredible. The entire incident came to an end pretty quickly because Ron Paul's wife, Carol, said baloney. Hopefully she said something a lot stronger than that while remaining ladylike, of course, because she refused to be screened by TSA personnel, saying she wore a pacemaker. And a Paul aide began taking video of the harassment on his cell phone. I believe, as do many other analysts, that this is just another example of the establishment's efforts to sabotage Ron Paul. He lost. He acted like a gentleman. He was willing to go away peacefully, and yet they had to put one more jab into him. They had to just show him that they are in power and they can do this to him even though he was a presidential candidate and is still a sitting member of the United States Congress. And I think it's disgusting. The TSA ought to be abolished. The people who are running it ought to be called on the carpet. But of course, in Obama's America, that will not happen. When we come back, we'll talk about a different vision of America, or at least some kind of blurry dream that Mr. Romney has tried to explain, or rather work around explaining. Well, I don't suppose it was printed this morning in the newspapers in what they used to call end-of-the-world type size, which was like letters 6 inches high. But Mr. Mitt Romney formally accepted the Republican presidential nomination yesterday in a speech that was designed, of course, to get votes. He made these incredibly radical assertions like what America needs is jobs, and that we have to forget about what might have been and look ahead to what can be. Now, he did have some pretty good speech. Some parts of the speech I thought were pretty good. They were decent. With his money, he had to be able to hire the best speech writers. Unfortunately, he obviously didn't. I mean, I love this line. Hope and change had a powerful appeal, but tonight I'd like to ask a simple question. If you felt that excitement when you voted for Barack Obama, shouldn't you feel that way now that he's President Obama? You know there's something wrong with the kind of job he's done as president when the best feeling you had was the day you voted for him. Well, the media reports that the speech electrified the crowd of delegates. I suspect if you looked around the edges where the Ron Paul people were seated, people weren't screaming and waving signs exclaiming "Mitt" and "Believe." I suspect there were probably a few people raising their middle finger. I don't think anybody mooned him, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody did. I hope so. If so, I'm sure someone caught it on Facebook and it'll appear imminently. But, you know, it was sort of the same old thing. Mitt Romney is a businessman, has been a businessman, but he's a politician. He was governor of Massachusetts, who crafted his candidacy and his governorship in Massachusetts to the left because that's what he needed to get elected. Now his campaign advisors have decided that the direction where they think they can get the most votes, because remember, in the American presidential system, it's not who gets the most votes, it's whoever gets the most electoral votes. So it's a complex formula, which is, I think, a good thing because it's the last remaining bit of federalism from the Constitution that they haven't completely destroyed yet, although the District of Columbia has 3 votes and it shouldn't. That was done by constitutional amendments, so at least it's legal. But so it's a good thing, and I'll tell you why it's a good thing. Because if it were as simple, whoever gets the most votes, there are a whole lot of states who would never see a presidential candidate I was almost going to say up close and personal, but since Ron Paul was a threat, potential threat when Romney was in Tampa and Ron Paul was 30 miles away in Clearwater, then I don't think anybody is going to get up close and personal to Mr. Romney ever, unless they're Secret Service or a really big donor. He talked in bland niceties. He talked about his family and faith. He called them the foundation of American values. That's true. But the foundation of American values were not his family and certainly not his faith. It's been written that in every log cabin as the frontier expanded, there were two books, the King James Version of the Bible and Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. I don't think some of the other books that Mr. Romney considers revealed Scripture were part of those frontier cabins. He says, we look to our communities and our faiths, our families for our joy, our hope, and support in good times and bad. It is both how we live our lives and why we live our lives, the strength and power and goodness of our communities, our families, and our faiths. This is all nice, mushy stuff, but it paints no vision of the future. It only painted a vision of the past. In fact, probably the best part of the speech in some ways was when he told a story and then was choked up, at least was trained to be choked up, on the stage of how his father, married to his mother for more than 6 decades, would bring a rose each day to his mother's bedside, and the way his mother found out his father has died was because one morning there was no rose. Well, that's nice. That's nice. It was a nice speech, but it's not a vision of the future. He talks about building visions. He talks about the past. He talks about the Sports Authority. He talks about an early childhood learning center. He always talked about the past. His promises for the future completely differ from the promises that were made by his vice presidential candidate, at least in terms of budget priorities. None of them have talked about the real issues. Jobs are one of the issues. The economy is one of the issues. And it's good that he wants to avoid tax-mageddon and that he wants to lower taxes. But neither Mr. Romney nor his vice presidential candidate came out and talked about the real problem with America, which is that, as Ronald Reagan said, government is not the solution to the problem, government is the problem. He didn't talk about all of the problems that government has created. He basically said, I can manage them better. And he went out of his way to appeal to every possible group, particularly women voters. He mentioned women or woman 6 times and mother or mom another 12 times. You know, with his personal approval ratings in mind, Romney emphasized attacks on Obama's economic record, which is abysmal, is absolutely abysmal. But Romney hasn't said really anything that's going to fundamentally change America. He hasn't said, we're going to repeal the NDAA. He hasn't said, we're going to repeal the Patriot Act. He hasn't gotten up there and said, we managed to fight a Cold War against the Soviet Union, and without firing a shot, even with enough nuclear missiles pointed at the United States to destroy the whole world, we beat them with our industrial capability and our commitment to individual freedom, and without taking away the rights of Americans, without spying on Americans, without having secret courts, without having the right of the president to detain people without charging them with anything. He didn't do anything, any of that. You know, it is gee, I've done a great job, I'm rich, I've done a great job as a businessman, so I can run America like a business. Well, let me tell you something. The government of the United States is not supposed to be run like a business. It's supposed to be run like a limited government. He should go back and read the Articles of Incorporation of this business he wants to run, which is called the Constitution. And it says that all of those things are supposed to be left alone, and the government's not supposed to be involved in them. Does he want to grow the economy? Fine. Wipe out all of the federal programs that are unconstitutional, and the economy will take off like a rocket to the moon. Restore real money, and it will take off like a rocket to the moon. You know, it's the same crap of being very light on specifics and just reiterating the same stuff that he said throughout the campaign. Some kind of pledges on forging new trade agreements, tapping new sources of energy, repealing the health care, Obamacare plan. Of course, how he can say that without blushing, well, maybe he did blush. Maybe the makeup was good enough. I don't know. But because it's based on Romneycare, but there was no substance. There was no vision of a freer or greater America. None of that was there. It was he talked about saving America from unspeakable darkness. Ronald Reagan talked about a shining city on a hill. He said the future is our destiny. The future's out there. It's waiting for us. Our children deserve it. Our nation depends upon it. The peace and freedom of the world require it. And with your help, we will deliver it. Let us begin that future together tonight. The best way that future can come is to leave us the hell alone, establish a fair tax system, real money, limited government, be a conservative, respect the rights of individuals, and America will become the greatest, freest country in the world again and be the first great civilization in the history of the world to ever fall this far and come back. But frankly, I don't believe Romney can do it. He, first of all, doesn't really believe in it. And the rest we'll talk about later. Well, you know, I really got disgusted with the Republican Party even more last night, but with the reaction of the convention to the speech by former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. Now, Jeb Bush did a pretty good job as governor, but when he got up and staunchly defended the presidency of his brother George W. Bush, whom I consider the second worst president since Abraham Lincoln, second only to Mr. Obama, he got a standing ovation. Now, this is the man, George W. Bush, who ushered in the Patriot Act, who laid the foundations for the imperial presidency upon which Mr. Obama has built so well and so strongly. And to try to pretend that you can separate the Patriot Act from the NDAA is just absolutely false. It's a lie. I'm sorry, Jeb Bush, but you got up and you lied. You know, you talked, now, you were right when you said it's time to stop blaming your predecessor on your failed economic policies, talking about Bush, because Bush was not too bad on economics, even though on other things like foreign policy he couldn't say nuclear. But that was only part of it. George W. Bush left America with a legacy of the complete destruction of constitutional government. He sent American troops in without a declaration of war. He imposed the Patriot Act, 2,800-page law that was passed almost in minutes. It was a couple of days, and created this monster administration that laid the groundwork for Barack Hussein Obama II to go ahead and put teeth and life into this monster that George W. Bush created. And the fact that George Bush's presidency got a standing ovation proves to me that none of these people are statesmen. They're all mere politicians, because the definition of a statesman is one who looks toward the next generation, whereas a politician only looks toward the next election. And I'm sorry that Jeb Bush has tarnished his pretty good record as a governor by getting up and lying and making an ass of himself, in my opinion, on international TV, defending the presidency of George Bush. The only thing he could have done worse is maybe he could have said what a great job Richard Nixon did and talk about Richard Nixon's morals. That would have been interesting. But he didn't do that. Now, let it not be said that the Republicans are the worst, because they're not. I mean, we still have the Democrats, and the Democratic National Committee and Democratic National Conventions could be a lot more fun, actually, because I still have some friends in the Republican Party. I still have some small, tiny little bit of hope that the Polistas and some of the conservatives in the Republican Party, especially in the congressional level, will rise to the top and take back the party and turn it back into the party of Ronald Reagan. I don't think Romney will, but only the way Romney will is if he's forced to by the people within his party. You know, Vice President Joe Biden was supposed to show up, but he didn't take his party crashing trip to Tampa this week. I wish he had, because it would have been funny, because he would have said lots of stupid things, because he always says stupid things. And so, but they decided to keep him locked up in the Naval Observatory, the vice presidential residence, instead, or send him out to places like, you know, Upchuck, Idaho, and Nowhere, Wyoming, where no one would pay any attention. However, the Democratic National Committee chair, and that's her title, chair, so I guess she's a piece of furniture. I would call her chairwoman if I would deign to speak, if they would allow me to speak proper English, and I guess since this is my show, I can. So I'll call her a chairwoman, because by her appearances, her sex appears to be female. I won't use the word gender, because gender has to do with grammar, and we're not talking about grammar except when we talk about stupid words like chair. But anyway, this piece of furniture from the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, did show up and ended up on Radio Row at the Tampa Convention Center. But she insisted that all conservative media be kept away from her. She is a princess, I guess. She is above having to deal with the free press. After all, she holds the exalted title of chief piece of furniture of the Democratic National Committee. What's really interesting is Schultz is following the path of Obama and Romney, and said she would only answer questions from the National Public Radio. Now, they are the ones who throw the easiest questions, are already left-wing, only after they provided her in advance with a list of those questions, so someone smarter than she, because, of course, any human is smarter than a piece of furniture, that's the only way she'd answer them. Talk about not feeling confident in yourself or what you believe. Well, that's easy. She doesn't believe in anything except getting elected. This is getting really insane in politics. Those who lead should be able to speak and answer questions honestly without being coached and acting on cue. As a woman in her position, she ought to be able to deal with the press, except she's there as a token. The Democrats have got a woman national chair. Now, I don't know whether it's a living room chair or a kitchen chair, but the Democrats have a chair who's a woman, and so this is to get the female vote, which is an important part of the Democrat plan to get elected, which is 95% of the black vote, 60% of the women vote, and, 10% of the white men who haven't read a newspaper in 20 years and don't know what's going on. Her excuse was, I quote, I can't exactly tackle 30 or 40 reporters. This is a media gaggle. No, she's just an idiot. Breitbart reports, it's not that Wasserman Schultz received treatment any different from any other celebrity on Radio Row. Congresswoman, at least the Republicans have women, not chairs, Michelle Bachmann was thronged by reporters and admirers when she arrived on the scene. So was former Senator Rick Santorum. So was Herman Cain. And it's not just conservatives. Roland Martin of CNN received heavy attention on Radio Row. Juan Williams of Fox News and Thomas Friedman of the Gray Lady of the New York Times got heavy attention in the Google Lounge downstairs. But Wasserman Schultz apparently merited special treatment. When she was asked a question about Obama's record on Israel, she quickly looked away. When she was asked, when her handlers were asked why she'd come to the Republican National Convention if she wasn't even going to speak with any conservative media, they were just pushed aside. This is typical of the Democratic Party, which is not to answer any questions. They can't speak the truth because they don't know it. What do they believe? They hold their finger up to see, wet their finger and see which way the wind is blowing. And then they decide. This is David Finzer, and I'll be back with more in a little bit. Well, since the Democratic Party could not disrupt the Republican convention by sending their furniture to the press box, it looks like they decided to do it another way using the power of the United States government Justice Department. What I'd like to know is, what are uniformed field representatives of the Department of Justice's Community Relations Service doing assisting Occupy/anarchist activists outside of the Republican National Convention in Tampa? This is a question that was posed on the internet by Rebel Pundit as video emerges that seems to show that the DOJ is somehow helping the Occupy people outside the Republican National Convention. According to Rebel Pundit, exclusive video captured by Breitbart News during the Occupy anarchist demonstrations outside the RNC Tuesday shows the Community Relations Service people of the Justice Department, field representatives wearing DOJ logo polo shirts and hats and conversing with Occupy protesters. In one case, a CRS representative and protesters are seen giving each other a high five. The CRS reps are also seen relaying specific instructions to the activists about the location of prearranged buses that were apparently taking them to their next scheduled demonstration. It's so nice that the Department of Justice is now arranging transport and coordinating transport, apparently, for Occupy. According to the DOJ's website, the CRS's mission is to be a peacemaker for community conflicts and tensions. It was created as part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and has also grown to encompass the Hate Crimes Prevention Act. The story is still developing, but we already know that the Obama administration has strong ties to the Occupy movement and that they've openly endorsed the movement as a whole. The question that still remains, though, is what the hell are the CRS people doing helping the protesters, actually helping them load onto the buses and coordinating with them? I would like to know just how far Mr. Obama and his undemocratic party will go to mess up the convention, which they didn't succeed, to protest during the campaign, to keep their emperor ensconced in his expensive public housing. Now, he's done some other interesting things, and I'd like to talk about it because he's attacked Mitt Romney for offshoring and the Republicans for moving things offshore. And I think this is a matter of, to use an old expression with no racial connotations whatsoever, the pot calling the kettle black. That's back when they had pots and kettles that were both made out of black metal, for those of you who don't remember that. But I'm old, so I remember those sorts of things. GM, sometimes known as Government Motors, opened a plant in Red China 4 months after closing a plant in Wisconsin. Now remember, GM is basically owned by the United States government now, thanks to Obama. That's bailed out General Motors, expanded its small truck and SUV manufacturing facilities in Red China right after closing down almost identical facilities in Janesville, Wisconsin, which happens to be GOP vice presidential nominee Paul Ryan's hometown. This is a very plant Barack Obama pledged to save and keep open, quote, for another 100 years in 2008. Well, I guess those 100 years passed very, very quickly. I don't know, maybe it's mouse years, dog years, I don't know. GM has increased its manufacturing capacity in Red China by 55% since emerging from bankruptcy, thanks to a $50 billion, B for billion, bailout from taxpayers, which is an important piece of that increased capacity has taken place in Jilin province in Red China. Red China, which uses slave labor. Red China, where all of the government, all of their partners are owned by the Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, or officials thereof. On August 30th, 2009, so a year after the promise the plant would be open in Janesville for 100 years, GM entered into a 50-50 joint venture with Red China FAW Group Corp., which is one of Communist China's largest automakers. GM's cash influx helped boost FAW's efforts to expand its light-duty commercial vehicles and SUV manufacturing. The partnership sold more than 88,000 vehicles in 2007. And the move came only 4 months after GM shut down its Janesville plant, which built SUVs like the Chevy Suburban. The closure has become a matter of an appropriate controversy on the campaign trail after Paul Ryan noted the Obama administration failed to save the plant despite promising to do so on the campaign trail. But then campaign promises are not real promises. They're just things you say to people, that all of which have an expiration date in 2-point type, which says they expire the day after the votes are counted. Obama actually stopped by the Janesville plant in February 2008 while campaigning for president and pledged to save the jobs of the more than 2,000 employees. Quote, if our government is there to support you and give you the assistance you need to retool and make this transition, this plant will be here for another 100 years. Well, one more lie. Of course, we can't really keep up. I would need an abacus, or actually more like a Cray computer, to keep up with all of the lies that Obama's told. In October 2008, Obama reiterated his claims he would save the GM plant. Quote, as president, I will lead an effort to retool plants like the GM facility in Janesville so we can build fuel-efficient cars of tomorrow and create good-paying jobs in Wisconsin and all across America. I have one word in response: liar. GM closed the plant in April 2009 despite Ryan's efforts to preserve it. The Obama campaign has made the GM and Chrysler bailouts a centerpiece of its campaign, as Obama and Vice President Biden have claimed that their actions, quote, rescued the American auto industry. Yeah, and then moved it to China, Red China. Obama's blasted Mitt Romney as outsourcer-in-chief, and I've made it very plain thus far in the show, I don't like Romney at all. But, you know, Obama is just such a liar. Obama's made no mention of GM's rapid expansion in Red China and its use of cheap, really, slave labor. 70% now of GM's manufacturing is based overseas, while foreign purchases represent only 40% of sales. And taxpayers got screwed as well. GM and its lending arm, Ally Bank, have yet to repay the 42 billion of the 57 billion they received from American taxpayers, and GM's struggling European operations have dragged its stock down 40% since its record-setting IPO in 2010. The stock's fall is another blow to taxpayers who still own more than 25% of the company's shares. GM stock would need to triple in order to fully repay taxpayers. This is a perfect example of bad economics and flat-out lies. You do not reward a failing company who has taken the money out and sucked the money out with golden parachutes and expensive lobbyists in Washington and huge salaries for its executives by giving them federal taxpayer dollars. You let it die and let it be replaced by a company that is more efficient. That is how a free market works. Everybody's talked about this being the failure of capitalism. Hell, capitalism didn't have a chance. This is statism. This is Ludditism. The Luddites were weavers, hand weavers in Britain, who, when this steam loom was invented, which helped Britain's industry tremendously, they attacked them and broke them because they were afraid they would be put out of jobs. Now, if the money were spent to help people be retrained, perhaps, for other jobs, that would be fine. But to prop up a failing company and to only prop up the companies that really you like, that are on your side, with whom you're friends, that are going to get you votes, is criminal use of taxpayer dollars. It is a misappropriation of funds. If I did that in my financial company, I would go to jail. Well, now we're at the top of the hour. When we come back, it'll be Freaky Friday, and I'll be joined by Scott Chambers, Tim Sutton, and Ollie Neville as we talk about whether or not the Republican Party is relevant to young people. Well, we're having problems, and I'm sorry, this is the last day that we're going to be broadcasting using the equipment that we're using. Since you can't hear my guests, you only hear me responding to them, and that's really boring. So we're going to truncate the show today. We did a good first hour. On Monday, we will be back with everything having been completely rewired, reworked, and retested. So I apologize for this, but we're going to get this solved. And so I will leave you with this thought. Remember, you really only have three choices. Give in and live like a serf. Fight back, first in November. And then when you can't stand it anymore in a civil war, which you'll almost certainly lose, or get out and take with you the candle of freedom so that somewhere, somehow, someday soon with God's help, Ronald Reagan's shining city on a hill will be reborn. This is David Finzer for Truth and Lies Radio. I will be back on Monday.